Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the IGF session 2 to 3 on the award for the first telecom operator, for the first operator giving us affordable access for education, health, and empowerment. And I'm very, very glad to have with me Claire Sitop from the GSMA Mobile for Development, Sudhir Dixit from the IEEE Connecting the Unconnected, George Pereira from the EU Commission, responsible for DG Connect, 5G, 6G, and whatever is coming up. Nicolas Nazar from the Internet Society in Tanzania. Asrat Mulatu from the Internet Society in Ethiopia. Suvaina Farah, our guest of honor from the Vodacom Foundation in Tanzania. And Azem Adil from the GIZ. Our online moderator is Catherine Kimambo, here on my side, and our rapporteur is Jonathan Muringani from the Basic Internet Foundation. So the way we organize the session is that we see that connectivity is still the challenge number one. What we've done in the past is, sorry, next slide, please. We have the collaboration with GSMA to actually address the challenge of Africa south of Sahara, 75% of people basically being unconnected. And out of that, the coverage gap is rather small, 15%, but the usage gap is a lot bigger, 59%. 59% don't use the mobile broadband, though they would have the chance to use it. And that has been the question for us, what can we do in the future? And based on the experience of having connected 250 schools, next slide, we follow an approach of where we say, we work together with universities and operators and everyone else to build the national research and education, to strengthen the national research and education network, enable universities to connect, and get our students to go out to connect schools. And together with the operators, we then connect the schools and build the community learning and living labs. These are basically the takeaways, and with the next slide, I then just show you the practical story. Some of our mobiles are interfering, sorry for that. How we work with the community. And you see, like Catherine with one of our installations at the schools, reaching 20 to 25 kilometers. Without any further delay, I would then open up the floor for Claire, our collaboration partner at GSMA. Please, Claire, can you tell us a bit more about M4D and the things you are doing?
Inclusion and lead on digital inclusion gender at in the mobile development department at GSMA, and we're very much looking at trying how we can ensure that those who are not connected are able to connect and use the internet to meet their life needs. And as you highlighted, there's both a coverage gap also and a big usage gap. And in our research, we're seeing that the biggest challenge is in terms of being able to use it is a lack of affordable handsets and devices, literacy and skills, but there's also issues around lack of relevant content and services, safety and security concerns. And so I think, taking a holistic approach to kind of both improving affordability skills, improving safety and security, and ensuring relevant content is really needed to ensure that people are able to use the internet to realize the benefit that there is and not be left behind in this, our increasingly digital world. So I think the sort of collaboration, the kind of collaboration that you've been doing and talking about is absolutely critical if we're going to address this sort of multitude of issues. And those who are unconnected are disproportionately rural, women, poor communities, lower education, and persons with disabilities. So we really need to be focusing on specifically these segments if we're going to ensure that they're not being left behind. So thank you very much for the partnership and for the initiative that you're doing.
Oh, thanks so much, Claire. That was a short, fantastic introduction. And so without any further delay, Sudhir Dixit from the IEEE Connecting the Unconnected. Can you give us the pathway from standards? What is IEEE helping us to connect every single human on this earth?
Thank you very much, Joseph. Good morning to all of you. My name is Sudhir Dixit. I don't have much time. So basically, I'd like to talk about what IEEE is doing as far as the standardization of technologies for rural communication is concerned. So some of you may know that IEEE is a member-driven organization which has about 500,000 members around the world. IEEE stands for Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers. It has many different divisions, and one of the divisions is Standards Association. And in the Standards Association, there is an organization called New Standards Committee. So any new standards that people would like to propose, they come to this committee. And in this committee, there is there's something called a Rapid Reaction Standardization Activities Process, whereby every idea that is submitted, it gets considered in a very short time, and it goes to project authorization request phase, where it goes into the study group to be made a standard. So, what happens is that there is something called Rural Communication Standards Activities Program within this New Standards Committee. So all the proposals that come here, they get considered, as I said before. And there are 4 goals of this Rural Communication Interconnect program. One of them is study socio-economic and regulatory issues related to rural broadband. The other one is study existing rural broadband infrastructure. Third one is study normal broadband architecture from 6G perspective. And fourth is to propose new standards. So just to give an example, this is a new body within the New Standards Committee. About a year ago, we had 15 proposals that were considered by Rural Communication Standards Activities Committee. Out of those 15, which came from around the world, 5 of them, they never showed up during the meeting. So 10 were evaluated and they were discussed. And out of those 10, 1 was selected to move forward to project authorization phase. And out of that, and that was made into a project that is called P1962 project. So this is the only project that is going forward for standardization within the as far as the rural broadband infrastructure by utilizing solar panels as optical communication receivers. So the idea is that people have these solar panels at home, and they will act like receivers of optical signals directly wherever they may be coming from. So that has been considered to go forward for standardization by the IEEE Standards Committee. And that was approved only recently, about a month ago, and the kickoff meeting of this study group is going to take place on 1st of July 2025. So, in summary, what I would like to say that anybody as an individual or an organization is free to submit their idea or a proposal for potential standardization to become a standard, to be called a standard by IEEE. And I would also like to mention that many of us think that technology is the success, but that is really not true. To be successful, you need to have the technology, of course. You need to know what the user needs are, what the market needs are, and there have to be standards in place. Without standards, no manufacturer will build products because they are looking for volume to justify investment in any manufacturing process. So standards is a very important part of the overall process to have an infrastructure that will be deployed at a larger scale. So with that, I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Sudhir. And of course, without standards, we wouldn't have Wi-Fi, we wouldn't have connectivity, we wouldn't be anywhere. So from that one, I give the floor over to Jorge Pereira. Jorge, you are driving with a 5G, 6G connectivity all around Europe and the world. Give us your take on connecting the unconnected.
Good morning, everyone. My apologies for not being there. Thanks, Joseph, for the kind invitation. I don't know if I have time to present my slides, but indeed, as Joseph has mentioned, we have been for a long time trying to provide and ensure coverage for all in Europe. This is not easy, and this is not straightforward, because as it was already mentioned by Sudhir, the issue is that there are market interests that make it that return on investment is not guaranteed, namely for the rural areas that Sudhir mentioned. So in the context of our programs, we have defined, first of all, the so-called 5G action plan that aimed at providing access to everyone, everywhere, not only in the major cities, but also across the major transport paths in Europe. And this was done already in 2016. This was later expanded in the Digital Compass of 2021 to make sure that there would be effectively 5G everywhere by 2030. So this is now a much more precise and taxing objective. But it's not only the issue of coverage. It's also the types of services that people will be able to receive. We have addressed this in two main areas. In order to cover the main transport paths in Europe, we have launched an activity called 5G corridors for cross-border connectivity, because it is important that the fact that you move from one country to the other, that you do not lose services, and especially for those people living near the borders, this is a major issue. And the other activity centers around the so-called 5G communities. This started initially as the so-called project Wi-Fi for all, which provided grants for remote communities to be able to provide service to the community, local community, focusing around the so-called strategic development entities, which are schools, hospitals, but also the firefighters, the police, ambulances, libraries. So this type type of community services are the main targets of these 5G communities. So we went from Wi-Fi for all to 5G for all in these communities, and this represents a significant investment that is still going on, with the objective of providing gigabit connectivity for all households in Europe, which is a big undertaking. All means really covering not only, again, the major conurbations, but even all remote outlets across rural areas. And the second one is to ensure this delivery of advanced services. And it's not only education and health, but it's also safety, public protection, and these activities that are, again, mostly in rural areas that have to do with smart agriculture. The objective being of really promoting these advanced services and addressing the digital divide to make sure that people can really have the full benefits of this connectivity. There are still many challenges ahead. It's not only ensuring proper coverage, as I said, return on investment. It does not make this attractive for these sparsely populated areas, but really providing these advanced services to these smaller communities is again a challenge. So what are the costs? Who is going to cover this? All of this makes it difficult. But one measure, I would say, and critical aspect is the actual involvement of communities, because what I mentioned before, the 5G corridors and the 5G communities usually involve municipalities to provide these services, to provide the connectivity in the last mile. But in many areas, if you're talking about an isolated farm or things like this, we are not talking about communities, about municipalities. So how can the community, how can the individuals really get involved in all of this and have the full benefits? With this, I give the floor back to Joseph. Thanks.
Thanks, George, for the insights of the 5G for all and the community-driven. And I think that brings us directly over to you, Nasser, right? Because Tanzania is like community-driven, or what is your take?
Thank you, Joseph, for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dr. Nasser Nicholas Kirama. And I currently work for the Internet Society, and I am also the community networks champion, advocating for connectivity in Tanzania. I think one of the things that we need to realize is that there is an issue of investment, for the shareholders, and also there's an issue of digital divide in rural and urban Tanzania. And the number of telecom dark areas in Tanzania is still very high because of the issues of investment on infrastructure. And, this exacerbates the number of people who are still not connected to the internet. And the reality on the ground is, for example, if you are in Dar es Salaam, the commercial city of Tanzania, as you move maybe like 15, 20, 30 kilometers away from the commercial capital, you start experiencing instead of 5G, you start experiencing 3G, 2G, and sometimes no G. And the issue is about really, like I've said, is about the cost of investment. The infrastructure is very high. There is an issue of also even in those areas where people are connected, the internet is still very unreliable. And also, we have another issue in there of digital literacy. We have to really understand that, you know, the infrastructure is very expensive. Much as we would like the telecom operators to be everywhere, the issue is really investment in infrastructure. I wanted to highlight one of the impacts that we have been working together with Joseph and Basic Internet Foundation to connect. We are able to connect schools using a very simple basic equipment. And the appeal is for those who believe in a holistic approach to the Africa digital future to invest in social programs like this one. And this will enable as many schools to connect one at a time. And with that, we can bring hope not only to the schools, but also we can connect the community around in terms of health and agriculture as well. So with that, I give mic back to you, Joseph.
Oh, thanks so much, Nazar. And I think the views which you had from Tanzania, that is the views which might be slightly different in Ethiopia. So, Azrat, could you tell us what the situation is in Ethiopia?
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you, Joseph, for inviting me and raising this very critical question. So the issue of this, you know, attracting and scaling up stakeholders' involvement in providing affordable connectivity for schools, health stations, and communities needing a multi-pole strategy, because that is very critical. So because everyone has its own interest. So one of the key points would be, you know, policy initiatives and regulatory frameworks. So in Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Communications Authority, ECA, is, you know, creating these policies like through tax breaks, universal service fund, which they are already finalizing the framework, and the public-private partnerships, which are very critical. So this could have, you know, give a sales connectivity, a viable business case for ISPs and other stakeholders. Besides that, as a second critical point is we have to demonstrate, you know, projects and pilots in these underserved areas as a proof of concept, so that, you know, they can see tangible social impacts, which is another very critical point. From the third point, we can have, you know, some kind of, you know, financial models, blended financial models that can de-risk investments for ISPs, and, you know, other, you know, multi-stakeholder interest groups can chip in as we go on. The other one is very important: local ownership and demand generation. You know, you have to engage local administrations, school admins, and community associations early in the process, so that, you know, we have, you know, local buy-ins and sustainability, which is very important. And in the long term, it will bring, you know, new demands for services as they enjoy the different aspects of it. Then maybe at the last point, we can have, you know, data-driven advocacy is very important, because one of the problems I have seen in Ethiopia is lack of, you know, awareness what such initiatives could bring to the local community in urban and several areas. So, you know, we have to demonstrate the return on investment, which is very important, and what kind of social value of connectivity it can bring. Okay, so this needs evidence-based arguments, empirical evidence, so that we can build political confidence, which is one of the challenges here in Ethiopia. The other one is it will build financial momentum, so that we can, you know, expand the pilot to other places. So as a summary, you know, this issue is very critical, especially in Ethiopia, where underconnected in many places. Only connectivity is in rural and areas. That is the biggest challenge in Ethiopia, and much of the population is not living in urban areas, unfortunately. So this needs to scale up, in multi-stakeholder approach, aligning policies, showcasing impact, and mobilizing mixed funding mechanisms so that we can build grassroots ownership along the way. So Ethiopia is, growing in digital momentum, as you can see, in very aspects. So this might piggyback on these advancements and efforts so that smart inclusive engagement is brought. So these are the facts in Ethiopia. Thank you, Joseph.
Oh, thank you so much, Azrat. And we talked so much about digital public infrastructures here at the IGF. And of course, Azim, you from GIZ, you are heavily involved in all these discussions on policies. Could you give us your contribution or your take from the GIZ in this area of connectivity and infrastructures and so on?
Thank you, Joseph. And first of all, thank you for having me on this panel. And you know that I'm a fan of your work. I totally believe that access to quality education and healthcare is not only a privilege, but it's kind of a fundamental right. It's a fundamental human right. Yet, across many parts of the world, we totally see that, and especially in Africa, these essential services still remain out of the reach of millions of people, due to the high costs, infrastructure gaps, and geographic barriers. This is where the concept of affordable access for education and health becomes crucial. It really focuses on the breaking down these barriers by leveraging inclusive, low-cost solutions. Yes, at the forefront of GIZ, the German Development Corporation, which is supporting our partners' countries to harness digital public infrastructure. And in that regard, we have so many examples to share, several initiatives which has been taken with the time. I will like to talk about few of them. Let's talk about education. So GIZ supports digital learning platforms, digital solutions such as those are coupled with the offline and online approaches to provide access to the remote communities, and our major platform like Atingi, which is already providing services for the millions of learners across Africa, and gain free access to, people can gain free access to hundreds of multilingual courses aligned with the local needs and national standards. Not only this, but in healthcare, GIZ also supports for e-health and m-health, including mobile apps and digital health records. Our Smart Africa partnership that also advances on the data governance and health data sharing frameworks across the continent. These efforts are essential to building cross-border digital infrastructure that supports not just health system but also broader digital solutions. Strategic partnerships are very essential for GIZ work. With global tech firms and sport ministries of education and integrating digital learning into national strategies, these collaborations ensure not just innovation, but alignment with the national policies. Another initiative like Develop PPP program to co-finance with private sectors for the innovations that promote affordable access to essential services. I'm sorry, my throat is a little bit dry, so I will keep drinking. For example, the startups and companies receive support to develop scalable solutions under this Develop PPP program. GIZ's work is guided with a couple of principles, which are some of them I would like to highlight. Let's say the local ownership. We totally believe that the programs are co-designed and with the local governments and communities for long-term impact. And other of the thing is, which we really consider, is scalability, that the initiatives start small but are designed for the national and regional scale-up. Gender inclusion, special focus for the women and the young, for the marginalized groups, cross-sector partnership, like with the civil society, startups, as well as with the multilateral cooperation. With these examples, I would just like to conclude here my discussion, and I would say that the affordable access for education and health is more than a development objective. It is a commitment to dignity, equity, and opportunity. With digital tools, strong partnerships, and community-driven solutions, GIZ is really helping to ensure that no one is really left behind. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Asim. Your commitment to dignity and the point out to the opportunities. Sylvana, we worked together for the last, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years, and we went to many downgrades. But at the end of the day, I see really the highlights. So I'm very pleased to have you as the guest of honor. We didn't get you over here yet, but we'll do it symbolically afterwards. So please tell us about the journey and your commitment from Vodacom Tanzania to launch the affordable access.
Thank you so much, Joseph, and thank you for having me. It's unfortunate that I couldn't be there with everyone in Norway, but happy to be able to join online. That's the power of technology nowadays. But in a nutshell, I just wanted to highlight with regards to our work as Vodacom Tanzania Foundation. First and foremost, we believe in the power of partnerships, and that in itself speaks volumes of what we have been able to do for the last 20 years. This year, the foundation turns 20 years, and we've been able to improve more than 10 lives across health, education, as well as economic empowerment. And this is purely because we believe in the power of technology and connecting people to a better future. But if I may, I'd like to touch on some of the work that we've worked on when it comes to affordable access, as well as connectivity in the education sector. In the past, we've been able to provide and connect more than 250 schools across Tanzania, providing ICT hardware, building computer labs, as well as tablets and routers, so that the schools can be connected to the internet, but also they can access thousands of materials and resources for the students and educators, as well as provide affordable and reliable internet to them all. This has enabled access to digital learning materials and platforms that have improved education outcomes. Our recent impact assessment shows that there has been considerable improvement, significant improvement in educational outcomes in the schools that have supported. But over and beyond that, we've also understood that there are gaps, and most of them are a result of digital literacy, specifically on the teacher training side of things. And last 2 years, we've shifted our focus towards the digital skills and empowering teachers with the right skills and literacy and learning tools to be able to serve the students, but also further communicate to the communities on the importance of that. We've expanded school connectivity to underserved and rural areas, and this is through partnership with the likes of our Universal Communication Service Access Fund, as well as the World Bank and the government of Tanzania through the partnership program that we do have, public-private partnerships program that we do have called Digital Tanzania Project. And that, in the last 3 years, all telecom operators have been able to deploy more than 700 towers in rural areas to connect. We've gone over and above what we have committed, but also we are embarking on a mission to upgrade our network to 4G coverage, to ensure that what Dr. Naza had mentioned, that when someone has 5G coverage in the city, how do we also make sure that, or ensure that someone in the rural area has the same access, and not necessarily maybe 5G, but at least 4G and not 2G anymore. We've collaborated with many partners, Catherine sitting on the panel there with African Child Program, but as well as recent, we've signed a memorandum of understanding with the Tanzania Institute of Education to zero rate their platform, which is a platform that provides resources to teachers in 184 centers. But we've also connected all those learning centers to ensure that they do get timely updates on their platforms, as well as scaling affordable internet solutions and maintaining the infrastructure there. Our purpose in general is to drive the digital divide in education and to bridge the digital divide in education. And this, we do it by ensuring that every student and teacher has the tools and connectivity they need to thrive in a digital world, but to also advance Tanzania's vision of inclusive technology enabled learning for all. On investments on infrastructure, Tanzania as a country, I believe we've been making many strides over the past years. If I look back 10 years to where we are today, there has been significant investment on infrastructure. There are still significant hurdles that we need to cross over, everything from energy and power in rural areas all the way to accessible roads, so that these infrastructures, these towers, can be maintained and ensure that we provide the connectivity that is needed to the citizens and to the public in those areas. But digital literacy has been at the core of what we do, and we see significant improvements with regards to the programs that we run. And last but not least, affordability of devices. I believe there's quite a lot of interventions that we can put in place as telecom operators, but as well as government. While we do enable access, usage is still very low, and this is because of the small percentage with regards to smartphone penetration. And nowadays, through a smartphone, they can access resources, and would also drive further the improvement of educational outcomes, but also access to different facilities from multiple sectors. Last but not least, I'd just like to conclude by thanking Joseph and everyone in the room, and also insisting that partnerships are key if we want to see the digital world a thriving digital world that we want in place. Thank you very much, Joseph.
Oh, thanks, Savannah. And of course, it's a bit difficult, but we want to really acknowledge the partnership which you brought across. And for this partnership, we have Sudhir from IEEE, we have Claire and Ruth from GSMA, we have George from the EU Commission, and us, and we'd love to symbolically give you this one over to Catherine, who will hand carry to Tanzania. So congratulations to the award. And I hope that your inspiration, which you are giving to us here in the room for connecting the 250 schools at a price down to 60,000 Tanzanian shillings for a 10 megabit per second link without data cap, which is about $22 to connect a school with unlimited data. That has really been the game changer in Tanzania. And we really hope that this is scaling up to the whole of Tanzania. Thank you so much. Having said that, if you have a question, this is the time for you to jump in. You have so much expertise here. Please go ahead and bring your questions across. The mic is over there, and the online questions is also here. So while we have one participant going to the mic, then we take one online question, which is, Nassar, that is to you and to you, Savannah, and that is, what are the policy frameworks in Tanzania to actually foster the school connectivity? Do you have specific policy frameworks?
I probably will talk about what is happening in terms of recognizing the framework to recognize small operators. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of recognizing small operators like, for example, community networks or community internet service providers, the regulator has come up with, the framework to see how they can accept, small operators. That is the one that I know of, but we have the Tanzania Digital Economy Framework 2024-2034. That one also recognizes the importance of connectivity, especially in the rural areas. If at all, Tanzania and Tanzanians have to realize the fruits of the digital economy. That is what I can say for now. Thank you.
Okay, so the second question is goes to Zuena. So it addresses why internet service providers and operators engage in such initiatives, and what are the potential benefits?
Thank you, Catherine. I would start with our why, with regards to why we engage in such initiatives. For Vodacom, it is embedded in our purpose, and our purpose we are a purpose-led organization, and our purpose speaks on one, empowering people, two, protecting the planet, and three, maintaining trust. And across all our commercial activities, purpose is embedded, whether it's through digital inclusion, financial inclusion, accessibility, or ensuring that our actions, our activities are not harming the planet, and what we do to ensure that there's restoration and reforestation as well with regards to our activities. So that is why. That is our why. We believe that as a technology company, as a telecommunication company, we can connect people to a better future. On the aspect of what is the benefit, one is that having increasing digital literacy, increasing digital skills, we're seeing an uptake of data services. But also on the other end is that to be able to reach people, to be able to improve lives, we need to be a digital connected world, but also access to educational resources, access to health facilities. We've worked across these three different pillars of health, economic empowerment, as well as education. And we're seeing remarkable improvement in all the regions that we work with, as well as better improving lives of Tanzanians. We believe also that it is our duty as an investor in the country to ensure that our work improves the lives of the Tanzanians. Thank you.
Thanks, Suena. And we have someone who wanted to ask a question from the room. Please introduce yourself. And we only have 2.5 minutes left, so very short answers, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. My name is Barak Otieno. I chair the Association of Community Networks in Kenya, and I have partnered with Basic Internet as well in community connectivity in Kenya. Some quick points. First, congratulations, Vodacom Tanzania, for showing the way and working towards lowering the cost for connectivity. Now, quickly, in addition to the issues that have been raised, evidence-based research is key in addressing this particular topic of affordable access for education and health. One of the learnings from the projects that I have done with the Basic Internet Foundation is measurements using the network cell InfoLight. And this has been key in actually identifying areas that do not have an adequate signal that can provide meaningful access to the community. As we speak, there's still approximately 70% of sub-Saharan Africa that does not have meaningful access, and that is still in using 2G, while the global north has already moved out of 2G or is at this, or some of the countries that are at the sunset phase of 2G. So this is an area that we need to deal with. Secondly is capacity building, targeting the government, targeting civil society, targeting private sector players, and academia. We attempted a similar approach in Kenya. We only succeeded with 45 schools because the government said education is free. So why are you talking of charging the schools, yet you know very well that we have a policy framework that dictates that education is free? Thirdly is the issue of advocacy, which we are doing here. I'm happy to see Naza from the Internet Society. I'm also a member of the Internet Society chapter, and the association and the chapter and many other stakeholders are engaged in advocacy to make sure that we create more awareness in this. Lastly, the definition of meaningful access varies. For instance, right now, in Kenya, as per the education framework...
You have to conclude. We only have 10 seconds left.
10 seconds, yeah. Meaningful access is 50 MB, while in some environments or contexts, we are talking about gigabytes.
Sorry. That was a long closing remark. I think we covered all the points. If you have more points, I'm very happy that you joined us. Thank you so much. And by this one, I close the session. And again, we are looking forward to have more telecom operators to join us and ISPs on the path for affordable access for education, health, and empowerment. Thank you, everyone.
All right. We can raise for a picture, I think.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for the IGF Open Forum on forum number 71. Hopefully you're all at the right place. It says Advancing Rights, Respecting AI Governance and Digital Inclusion through the G7 and the G20. And I'm just going to start off by speaking a little bit about the objectives of this session and locate it a little bit in the AI-driven and data-driven context that we find ourselves in. But as we find these data-driven technologies, such as AI, rapidly becoming general-purpose technologies, and data-driven solutions, such as digital public infrastructures, infusing contemporary economies, public services, and civic spaces, or at least hopes of it being able to do so for many of our countries, global cooperation is required more than ever to mitigate not only the heightened risk and amplification of existing inequalities, but also ensuring the better distribution of the opportunities that are associated with these advancing technologies. Despite growing attention from multilateral fora such as the G7 and G20, AI policies, as has been shown through the GDC processes and through the AI governing humanity work done through the Tech Envoy's office, that global majority countries are often excluded from meaningful participation, and particularly multi-stakeholder participation in these processes. And these are the countries that are most impacted by AI-driven change, and which are at least represented in these decision-making processes that are emerging formally within the UN, but of course also through the emerging economies leadership of the G20 over the last 3 or 4 years. I think very importantly from the Indian G20 process, we've now got the legacy of digital public infrastructures, which has emerged as a critical area of governance that will require more integrated data governance and in order to get the best and optimal outcomes out of these infrastructures, and of course to deal with post-pandemic economic and social reconstruction that many of our countries continue to be dealing with in an increasingly volatile geopolitical situation, and in some ways make us feel further than ever from achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which are all of our objectives. So just for this session, we are hoping that we have a lively discussion here, and we urge you all to step up around the table. We won't make you answer any questions. Just you're welcome to listen, you're welcome to participate. There will be opportunities to do so, and we look forward to that. And we're hoping that from this we can feed into processes that are trying to leverage the leadership within the G7 and within the G20 over the past few years, and to bring some of these processes together in terms of addressing some of these big global challenges that we face. We're going to be drawing from insights from Brazil, the very successful leadership of the G20, and certainly a mainstay in the integrated digital transformation agenda from India, Brazil, and now, of course, South Africa. I think they will be joining us there they are. Okay. So we have a wonderful set of panelists with us. I'm going to ask them when they first speak just to locate yourselves a little bit more in the international relations or policy side, or where precisely you fit in here. But just for your affiliations at the moment, we have Alison O'Byrne. I'm not sure if I've got that quite right, but please correct. Who's the Director of International Communication and Internet Policy Innovation, Science and Economic Development at Canada. So a lot on your plate. And then we have Mlindi Moshalugu, who's the Deputy Director General in the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies in the Government of South Africa. And we have Eugenio Garcia, who's the Director of Science, Technology, Innovation and Intellectual Property at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we've got Sabanaz, who's Rashid Dia, who's also the co-convener of this session and will be speaking shortly after me and introducing some of the issues around the T7 and G7. I'm going to start right away by asking Sabanaz, please go ahead and speak to us about the potential of the G7 to be leveraged with the G20.
Thank you, Alison, and good morning, everyone. I am Sabhan Rashid Dia. I'm with the Tech Global Institute. We are a Canada-based not-for-profit that focuses on digital rights and policies for the global majority. So it's a really interesting place to be, kind of, seeing the developments in G7, closely following the G20, and then really trying to understand how all of this fits into the priorities of the global majority communities that we serve around the world. So I think I'll just start off by saying that Canada has really inherited the G7. There's a bit of an echo on the side, I'm not sure, but has inherited the G7 presidency from the very successful Italian chairship. And at a time when really the world is facing a number of different kinds of challenges, right? There's obviously, in addition to the geopolitical situation, we're also seeing increasing funding cuts for the not-for-profit sector and the broader human rights and civil society movements around the world. We're seeing an increasing trust deficit between the global majority and many of the Western allies, and we're seeing increasingly this move towards techno-sovereignty that threatens the promise of the open, interoperable, and free internet that we all kind of are working for here today. So kind of keeping all of that context in mind, and I'm also a senior fellow with CG, who is the T7 co-chair, but I'm speaking here on behalf of TGI. I think there's a couple of different priorities we see the G7 presidency can really champion that would really bring together the various equities that we see around the world today. So I think the first one that's really important, from a non-state stakeholder perspective, would be data flow with trust. And this is really building on the Hiroshima principles from several years ago, but currently in the world today, because of the increasing pressures of whether it is, the race to the bottom for AI, or this need to establish sort of national boundaries around how we think about data ownership, data rights, we're seeing a movement where increasingly having localized data centers, localized data framework, or data governance frameworks becomes increasingly more popular, often at the expense of the free, interoperable, and open internet. And so, although currently there really isn't, while there are some principles here and there really isn't a strong global multilateral agreement around data flow with trust. There has been different models of it, which has been quite fragmented. But I think, and we believe that in terms of, just building on what we saw with the Hiroshima process, Canada really has a strong opportunity to be able to pull together a multi-stakeholder process in which we co-develop shared principles for data flow across geographies, across regions, across different kinds of economies, and build towards a trustworthy transfer framework that could really speak to the open, interoperable, free internet, open, interoperable, and free internet that we all care about. And this really is kind of grounded on, and what I want to emphasize is oftentimes when we think about data flows, it really gets tied into national security and privacy. But I think Canada, with its position, really has the opportunity through its G7 presidency to be able to move forward with also a data flow with trust framework that's grounded in international human rights law. And so kind of combining privacy, national security, lawful access of data, which is underpinned by strong international human rights frameworks. So the second one on that sort of list of priorities is really around democratic oversight of public infrastructure. And that really ties in the G20's sort of priorities around digital public infrastructure. Increasingly, again, we're seeing a lot of shift towards ownership of local infrastructures, or increasingly where infrastructure is owned by the broad private sector, oftentimes they are not prioritizing public interest. And so again, through Canada's presidency, and I think this is also a recommendation from the T7 communique from CG, is really focusing on the kind of reimagining or bringing together the public sector, not only as a regulator, but also a market shaper. And in that way, beginning to think through what does a decentralized infrastructure look like, what does infrastructure with trust look like, and an infrastructure that really can tackle concentration of power, but at the same time, builds in those public interest elements and has strong democratic oversight. And the third and last one that I think we are prioritizing, and we hope the G7 presidency prioritizes, is really around targeted investments that really looks into building AI capabilities, particularly through a very regional and sectoral level interventions. And by that, what we're looking at is really for the Canadian presidency to center digital inclusion as one of its key pillars. And again, this was also recommended through the T7 communique, but as a key pillar in which we're trying to understand that not all countries in the world are on the same stages of AI development. But then what does a targeted investment in this particular space look like that builds towards these shared principles of privacy, for human rights, of trust across the governance ecosystem, and kind of really underpinning these investments in strong multi-stakeholder processes and consultations where we can see communities that have historically been left behind to become part of this overall global change. And I think Alison also raised key points about AI being, AI offers great opportunities, but it also can be a great amplifier of digital divides. And so really this is a key area where strong targeted investments, both in terms of building out whether it's regional coalitions or regional sort of multilateral processes, or it is looking at specific sectors, for example, health and agriculture, which has tremendous opportunity to be accelerated through AI, and making investments that are very much looking into the needs of the developing world and is able to bring together various priorities. And so those are some of the areas where we see a lot of opportunity for the G7 to work together with the G20, given those are shared principles and shared areas of priorities. And I hope we can discuss more of this in the panel. Thanks. Over to you, Alison.
Thank you so much. I'm going to speak a little bit now about the South African T20 process, but also just to say that Research ICT Africa, which I'm the Executive Director and represent here, is also a knowledge partner to the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, who lead the Digital Economy Working Group, and the AI Task Force on Data Governance, data innovation and sustainability. And so have been very much seized with South Africa's themes during the presidency of equality, solidarity and sustainability. These are long-standing themes on the continent. They're very central to our African Agenda 2063, and of course to our digital transformation strategies as well. I'm going to, of course, leave Melindy to speak to the specifics on the G20 agenda, but just to speak about the integrated digital transformation strategy that we have been following with G20, or we've been involved with the G20, which has really tried to consolidate the emerging economy leadership of the G20 and really take forward from each G20 these important aspects that are somewhat come with a different lens on some of those issues. So just very quickly to speak to some of these important crosscuts that you have on free flow of trust and fragmenting internet and these sorts of things. There have been very interesting discussions within the G20, which are obviously still underway, and there's no consensus on these sorts of things, but certainly a number of the policy briefs, these issues have been taken up very strongly within the G20 and T20 under Brazil. So much so that data was proposed as a major initiative coming out with the T20 and C20 actually asking for a D20. It seems to be so significant. And certainly it's a very strong crosscut. The T20 agenda very much shadows the G20 agenda. It's a little bit tighter because we don't have a lot of resources, but things that we've had incredible policy inputs on equitable digital inclusion, on transformative DPI. There is another category that Melindy will speak about around micro enterprises, which is a focus of the Digital Economy Working Group. It does come up in some of the digital inclusion discussions quite strongly in the policy briefs. And then there's one on enhanced technologies and specifically AI. And I think just bringing this lens that we've had, starting with the Indian presidency, with a focus not only on DPI, but the strong focus on data for development and what that meant in that context. And just, bringing together some of the development, debates and some of the data debates, which have, largely, when we speak about the, cross-border flows and flow with trust, that these are very often conceptualized in, of course, international human rights, but within frameworks that have been focused very strongly on first generation and fundamental rights, on very individualized notions of privacy, and very often not adequate attention to some of the collective and systemic harms that result from this. Primarily, and in Africa, with over half the population not online, primarily from exclusion. So for the equitable, the digital inclusion component, both within the G20 and the T20, there's been a strong emphasis on looking at the extensive evidence we have that this is no longer, or if we're just talking digital inclusion, I'm not talking about the digital economy at the whole, which obviously needs very advanced technologies in order to flourish. But if we're looking at digital inclusion for internet purposes, the main constraints we're finding at the moment actually on the demand side. So it's not just inclusion, it's about equitable inclusion, not about people being on tiny little bits of data and eking out stuff, but actually being able to, transact and even be productive. And I think that's come out very strongly in our continental frameworks that have been coming out in our policy briefs, certainly from African scholars and contributors, researchers to that process. That obviously requires a whole lot of attention, policy interventions that have to go beyond infrastructure that we need to look at. Just in terms of returning to the free flow of trust, because data governance has been such a big crosscut, it's come up in policy briefs for DPI very strongly. The focus there, both I think within the G20, but also in the T20, and drawing I think on the G20 from previous work done on the T20, has been about extending the focus on sort of techno-legal infrastructures to really understanding the potential of DPI in terms of public value creation, balancing the focus and the shift historically on sort of supply side infrastructural valuation of resources to looking at how we can get to more demand side evaluation and allocation of resources that would produce digital commons and public goods, and actually make these infrastructures beneficial and usable by the vast majority of people who, if we just implement them right now, are not going to be able to use them. And so that actually requires us to engage, and I think there have been really exciting engagements around things that have been already accepted in the G20 before, but really located not only in the Global South, but in an African context, which the presidency has been very committed to. This is an African thing. Unfortunately, our AU representative wasn't here today, but they're leading a lot of the projects on here because we've got these very strong data policy frameworks. They speak very much to redistribution, they speak very much to justice, and they highlight that you do not get, if you have free flow of trust with the current status quo, we do not have the environments that are equitably trustworthy on either side. And at the moment, the free flow of trust means we've got, or free flow, let's say we don't have trust. We have 70% of traffic going out to the continent and only 30% of data coming in. So we need mechanisms that will really allow us to redress some of these uneven impacts from the harms point of view, but also address some of the very uneven opportunities. And so in this context, a lot of interesting policy briefs around regulating access to data, regulating access to compute, and of course the important aspects you've raised of capacity building, not only for data scientists, not only for coding and STEM and that, but for institutional capacity building, regulatory capacity, new complexities that we need to deal with our existing regulators and the need to integrate them. So thank you for letting my long ramble go on, probably a little bit longer than it should have there. But let me quickly go to Alison and ask you, Alison, to speak a little bit about the priorities that are emerging around the digital technologies, these governance and some of the DPI issues we've been speaking about that have also just come out of your most recent meeting.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thanks so much. Thanks, and as my fellow Alison just noted, so I'm Alison O'Byrne, and I'm Director for International Telecommunications and Internet Policy in the Government of Canada's Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. It's the industry department. I'm very pleased to be able to speak on the panel today. I think this is a very engaging discussion already, and I will say that for having had that long discussion around the T20 process, I saw that you were not using notes for that, which means that's just all right front and center in your mind, which is very impressive to me, and I think speaks to a level of passion around the work for sure. Maybe I could talk a little bit about, as you noted, some of the key priorities that have been emerging in the G7 context for this year around digital technology, digital governance, and particularly artificial intelligence. I think I'm at a distinct advantage, regrettably, over our South African colleagues in the sense that our leaders meeting has already happened. So I at least get to speak to some of the points of consensus already arrived at, which I know is always more difficult when you're still in the planning process. But I do think that there are a number of priorities that came up, particularly in the context of artificial intelligence within Canada's G7 presidency this year, where we see some particular linkages to South Africa's G20 presidency, and more broadly to conversations that are happening this week and elsewhere around equity and around inclusiveness in the digital space, which I think is really valuable. You know, the G7 and the G20 will probably always approach these things with slightly different angles or slightly different approaches, but I think that there are links between the ways that we are thinking about technology and how to ensure that technology has equitable benefits to all people. In terms of Canada's G7 presidency and particularly where we've seen some of the emphasis on digital policy pieces, a lot of emphasis this year on artificial intelligence and on promoting economic prosperity for small and medium enterprises, you know, ensuring that folks have the skills, the talent, the resources to be able to effectively commercialize, effectively adopt, or effectively develop AI solutions that provide significant benefits to consumers, to clients. There's certainly an emphasis on building resilient future workforces as well. So in the skills development realm to prepare workers for AI-driven transitions. There were discussions this year at the G7 leaders meeting as well around energy challenges as it relates to AI. And of course, this comes from two different angles, both the challenges that are presented by AI from an environmental and a climate perspective, but also AI's potential role in helping us to identify solutions to ongoing climate challenges as well. And so two different kind of angles on that. And I would note as well that as part of the G7 leaders statement, there was a specific commitment to sort of engage in and develop partnerships and cooperation, particularly with emerging economies and developing countries. And so a real focus on ensuring that as we're developing technologies at home in Canada and G7 countries, that we're also looking for mutually beneficial partnerships that allow us to ensure that the benefits of those technologies are felt not just in G7 nations, but also in those emerging economies, in those developing countries as well. I think we've been obviously very pleased to see as well for South Africa as the president of G20 this year, highlighting the challenges that continue to be faced by the global majority in building resilient AI ecosystems, particularly challenges related to, you know, we discussed infrastructure, supply side challenges, but also demand side challenges like AI talent, access to data free flow, research and institutional capabilities, all those pieces that have to sort of be figured out in tandem in order to build these resilient AI ecosystems. It's an issue that's top of mind as well, as noted at the G7 Leaders Summit. And we've also, as Canada particularly, have been strongly engaged on Digital Economy Working Group, on the AI Task Force through the G20, and particularly giving consideration to how our own Canadian initiatives can support things like the AI for Africa initiative, Technical Assistance Policy Facility, how we can ensure that we are engaging in a way that allows us to take the kind of expertise and the resources that we have and apply those to international systems and to multi-stakeholder systems that then provide those benefits out kind of more equitably in the world. And I really do think that that's going to be at the heart of the work between G7 and G20 in the coming years, particularly on digital policy, is ensuring that we leverage these international processes, that we leverage our multilateral processes to be able to identify sort of consensus joint initiatives, but likewise that we leverage multi-stakeholder forums to do that too, that we bring in not just governments, but businesses, academia, civil society, to ensure that we are taking, as we say, this equitable approach to really advancing digital inclusion.
Thank you so much, Alison. I'm hoping we can come back and follow up on a number of interesting points. I'm sure, Lindy, you want to feed on to follow on from. But Lindy, why don't you just tell us a little bit about both the G20 Digital Economy Working Group, the AI pillar within there, of course the DPI pillar as well, and then the AI Task Force.
No, thank you, Alison, for that question. I think we have to recognize that, you know, as we join the G20, taking the presidency of the G20, we're one of the smallest members in terms of the economy in the G20. But also there are some challenges that we are facing, which includes like your youth unemployment, you know, digital exclusion, and some barriers to innovation. And we see that, this, if we bring in these realities, to the global digital discourse, especially on the areas of digital governance, artificial intelligence, and inclusive development, I think we can achieve quite more on that. But also listening to my colleague from Canada, I believe that there are some of, the shared initiatives that, the values that we can actually work around in terms of, some of these processes. While these processes, they're not really aligned or not institutionally designed to align to each other, but I think there are some common themes that we can work around. And if I can just go through, our G20 presidency, it's guided by our 3 pillars, which is solidarity, sustainability, and equality. But also these pillars, they underpin, the agenda of our digital economy working group, where we have placed the emphasis on digital inclusion, rights respecting AI governance, as well as the DPI. So if then you look onto the digital inclusion, we see that is a foundational challenge that we need to make sure that we address. Because from the early years of the WSIS process, we've known the power of digital technologies to transform the lives of our economies. But unless we address the cost of the devices and data, scarcity of local content, the gaps in digital skills, as well as inequalities in education, each of these new technologies wave will deepen the existing divides. So we need the deliberate action in innovation on the areas of AI as well as DPI. Otherwise, if we don't address those, we'll find that we exacerbate, the digital divide that is already there. So, but that is why then, as a country and our presidency, we are prioritizing the areas of investment in the digital public goods, which is the meaningful and affordable connectivity, the public interest data platforms, as well as the foundational identity systems that empower the individuals, not just systems. But we see that these enablers these are the enablers of human rights, economic opportunity, as well as the democratic participation. When it comes to AI governance, our priority is to ensure that the systems are inclusive, ethical, and accountable. This means that we have to protect privacy, safety, as well as information integrity, but also promote representative data sets to mitigate bias and discrimination. And it's one of the areas that we've been talking about, even on the other panels in this process, that, if we have to mitigate bias, we need to make sure that all the data sets, they are inclusive of all the, the demographics in the country as well as the continent. But also we are working on ensuring that we recognize data as a public good and expanding the equitable access for researchers, SMMEs, as well as, the local innovators. And I know that this is one of the areas that is normally, a bit of a context, because when you look on the private sector players, you'll find that they see the government data as the source of innovation. But what we are saying here is that data, both the privately generated data as well as the public generated data, needs to be the source, public good, and be used responsibly to drive innovation. But also we're working on the areas of building capacity across the compute infrastructure, talent pipeline, as well as context-aware AI research. It's one of the areas also, because if you were to look in terms of the compute capability as a country and also as a continent, you'll find that we're still lacking behind on that one. So it's one of the areas that we would like to advance in terms of our presidents as well, to make sure that this fundamental infrastructure is there and it can actually assist us. But also, as I draw to the close, so we continue to work on the DPI, which was started by the Indian presidency, which is emphasizing on the inclusive and interoperable systems, open standards, as well as governance that both enables innovation and also protects the public interest. So we also believe that, the scope is for deeper cross-forum collaboration is there, because if we were to look on the members of the G7, they are also the members of the G20, and I think we can exchange the best practices, align the approaches, especially when it looks on the areas of AI and data governance, but also look on how we can, advance, like the multi-rated system, like a digital, global digital compact. But most importantly, I think we must also commit into amplifying the voices of the global majority, not as implementers of external frameworks, but co-creators in the digital norms, and also shaping our shared future. Thank you, Alison.
Thank you so much, Lindy. And I think very keen to take up the points made by both of you, Alison and Lindy, on the potential for cooperation with the G7, or leveraging both those processes to take both processes forward. Before we come to that, I'm going to ask Eugenio Garcia to speak a little bit about the legacy, the G20 Brazilian legacy that very much I think we're committed to and building on, but also to speak about how we ensure that, I think it was regarded as such a successful presidency. How do you make sure that those legacies continue, that that you are able to continue to forge the progress made and the gains made in these multilateral processes going forward once the presidency is over?
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I think one of the first challenges that we faced when, in the beginning of our presidency of the G20 last year, was to define the priorities, especially for the digital economy working group within the G20. And we talked about this with our Indian colleagues, because they did an amazing job in terms of bringing DPI into the discussions of the G20. And we also share similar concerns. And of course, in Brazil, we are trying to improve digital public services, and etc. And but our approach was always trying to see how developing countries can make a meaningful contribution in digital technologies. So we decided in the end that 4 priorities would be our suggestion as the Brazilian presidency of G20. The first, universal and meaningful connectivity. Because of course this is an old issue, but we still have many digital divides. 1/3 of the world's population is still offline. So asking about global south countries, there is a lot that we need to do. So this was one of them. The second was precisely DPI, because we were also convinced that this was an important issue, and it would be nice to have some continuity from the Indian presidency with the Brazilian. Next, information integrity, but this was new, so we didn't know exactly how other members would react, if we would reach consensus, or they would like testing the waters, because for us it was a top priority, information integrity in the digital domain. And it was the first time that this issue was brought to the table in the G20, and we were successful because we reached an agreement in the ministerial meeting held in Maceió, which was September last year. You can also download the Maceió Declaration from the ministers, that you see the language adopted on information integrity. I think it was also important, and we were successful in this regard. And the 4th priority is artificial intelligence. So, but because not only people are talking about this, but we see AI as an opportunity to boost development towards a more equitable future, fostering innovation, enhancing productivity, advancing sustainable practice, and concretely improving the lives of people everywhere on the planet. And of course, to achieve this goal, the global governance of AI should mitigate potential risks and address the needs of all countries, including from the global majority. So this was more or less the idea that AI should be development-oriented and contribute to reducing inequalities. I think it was the basic approach. And we also proposed during the presidency the creation of an AI task force. And so now we are glad to see that we have the task force thriving during the South African presidency. So I think this, in terms of lessons learned, this is key, because we need to first ensure a smooth transition between the presidents, because that was a happy coincidence, because from India, Brazil, and South Africa, I think you might remember an initiative called Ibiza Dialogue Forum. It was created in 2003 to promote South-South cooperation. It's a group bringing together India, Brazil, and South Africa, precisely. So as three large developing countries, all democracies, and from three different continents, and also sharing similar concerns and challenges, so especially in terms of the global digital ecosystem. So this helped a lot for this smooth transition, because when we finished our presidency, our foreign minister in Brazil received a South African delegation, precisely to share our experience with them and see how we could guarantee that some of the issues that we brought would also have a continuation. And I think we were both successful as well. But for this to happen, we need political will. For example, let's say, what about the follow-up from these discussions within the G20 regarding other international organizations or international initiatives? Because after G20, now this year we had with the presidency of the BRICS in Brazil. So, and we also brought AI as a key point to discuss within the BRICS, drawing from this experience in the G20. Of course, they are completely different groups, but our approach was basically the same, that AI should be development-centered. And so, and another point is that also we have COP30 coming next November in Brazil, in Belém, the first ever COP in the Amazon rainforests. So when we say information integrity, we were in the beginning trying to understand the possible reaction from G20 members. But in the meantime, we were in conversation with the United Nations Secretariat, in particular the Department of Global Communications and UNESCO. And when we had the summits of the G20 in Rio, we launched a global initiative on information integrity and climate change. You see, they have the connection between the G20 and the COP30. So I think this, connecting these dots, you need to make a conscious decision to ensure not only smooth transition, continuity, and having the political will to follow up in a very concrete way. So this global initiative on information integrity and climate change has been launched. As now we are working with a call to action, a road to Belém, where the COP30 will be held. And I think this was very helpful. In general, we are very happy with what South Africa is doing in terms of moving forward with these topics, including in terms of the digital economy working group of the G20. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much for that. And I'm sure that Lindy wants to pick up on some of those points. But I'm going to go to the room, go forward to the room. I think the important point that you made, or Lindy made first, that we had to kind of pare down our ambitions, maybe not our ambitions so much, but what we could achieve. And so there's a kind of a little bit more limited agenda. And one of the things that I think sort of went to everybody's maybe regret, but I think it's been picked up, is the information integrity issue. And it's just been so overwhelming that it's come up anyway. And again, in these crosscuts, there is a focus on generative AI and deep fakes that has had an incredible response from member states, but has really picked up the issue of information integrity, although not formally on the agenda. So I'm sure we want to pick up some of those discussions. But I'm going to ask you to respond to questions from the floor and online, and then also do those responses to each other, please. So let's start with the room. Who would like to? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This has been a really interesting discussion so far. I have more insight into the G20 process. It's good to know that there are a lot of synergies, not just between the G20 presidencies, but also between the G20 and the G7. I was wondering if you're aware of any points of contention between these two processes, and if you could speak to those and how we can address them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a great question. Right. Maybe we can do the online? Yeah. Yep. Right. Can the online moderator hear me?
Hello, yes.
Hi. Have you got any questions to pose to the panel?
No, we do not have any online questions yet.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll just take that one question from the floor, but please indicate, let's take it, we've got another one from the floor. And then while people are responding, if there are any more from the floor or online, please let me know.
I'll be the sole questionnaire here. I'm a doctoral student from Iceland studying how very large platforms are undermining democracy, with AI, of course, playing a large role in that. What I have found in my studies is that there seems to be a lot of gaps between high-level discussions and policies and our aims and practicalities. Now, I have 30 years working experience in IT, so getting the input, training the people, integrating into computer science courses, etc., how are we sort of meeting the industry, meeting the people who are actually going to execute our policies? How would you recommend going about that? Where can we put our efforts so we get the most out of our efforts? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And another question from the floor?
Thanks. My name is Liz Orembo from Research ICT Africa. Now, my question is about the continuity of presidency from one country to another in the G20, as well as synergies. Now, South Africa's presidency comes after 4 Global South presidencies, and I'm curious about what are those concerns from the Global South that have been taken from the first Global South presidency, leading to a complete troika leadership from the Global South, and now South African presidency. And also tied to that, what new agendas or new concerns is South Africa putting forward to the G20, given that this presidency is not just a Global South also presidency, but also an African presidency? Thanks.
Thank you so much for that question, Liz. Perhaps if just we can add one question that I was expecting to come from the floor, but maybe also for us to address, is that obviously in terms of the processes of the G20 and the G7, we have this troika format because these bodies don't exist. They're not standing bodies and they have to be reconstituted each time. So this provides some of this continuity that we spoke about, can be so politically important in terms of continuity, but also, of course, can present issues if there is not alignment. And I suppose this is geopolitically a tricky time to be doing this multilateral work because of its enormous dependency on cooperation and common values and those sorts of things. So perhaps just because we've got so little time, just to, in your responses, maybe also just speak about the importance of the G7, G20 collaboration in this geopolitical context. Alison, I'm going to ask you to start off again.
A danger, of course. I think the first question was whether there are points of contention between the G7 and G20. No, never. I'm kidding. I think as we think about the sort of various questions that were presented, points of contention between G7 and G20, how we ensure a level of continuity across presidencies in either group, and how we ensure a level of continuity between the G7 and G20, I would say a couple of different things about that. One is that I think, and it's easy for me to say this, governments have an enormously difficult challenge when they face the presidency of either the G7 or the G20, because there's a significant amount of pressure internally within the government, both to deliver new sort of hallmark initiatives, so to kind of put your own stamp on the presidency and to deliver something that really stands out and is unique and brings something new to the group, while also having a level of continuity from previous presidencies. You don't kind of want to wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And so you end up in this real challenge that, if you went on forever, you could have an ever-expanding agenda of different items to discuss, and it just becomes too messy, and sometimes you kind of have to trim things back. So that is always the challenge, I think, that a new presidency faces when you're either in the G7 or G20 context. some of the pieces that are really helpful with that, or maybe one thing that I would really point to that's enormously helpful with that, and sometimes helpful in the scary way for governments, is multi-stakeholderism, which is to say that I think when you're a government and you're trying to decide what pieces of a previous presidency or what pieces of alignment between G7 and G20 really need to be the focus of your agenda, in addition to any kind of new hallmark initiatives that you're thinking of, when you're thinking about where that continuity needs to come, one of the places that you really look is to the stakeholder community. So if you have pieces from a previous presidency, or if you have pieces from the G20 and you're in the G7 context, where you see that there's a strong response from stakeholders, either positive or negative, it helps you to kind of situate yourself and understand what is going to resonate with an external audience beyond those kind of policymakers and the government sector, essentially. And I think it also gets to the very important question that one of the folks in the audience asked today about, then how do we link that from the policy space to the implementation space? You know, these G7 statements, G20 statements can be quite high level and sometimes quite general. It's beautiful to have these sort of big policy aspirations, but then how in reality do we implement those things? And I think that is also some of the answer to that question, is we then look to where we're seeing outcomes from whether it's previous presidencies or new ones that really resonate with the multi-stakeholder community, because it gives us an indication that there's probably mechanisms that we can use then and partners that we can have to actually implement those ideas, so that they don't just remain ideas in a statement, but they actually become practical, implementable policies.
Great, thank you so much. I think a lot probably to build on there. Sumaila, just to ask you, please, if any questions do come in online, just to give us an indication, but I'm going to continue getting some responses to the questions we've had here.
Yeah.
Lindy, will you like to respond? And of course to your panelists as well.
No, thank you, Alison. No, I think if I can just start quickly on some of the questions, especially the one that came with the doctoral student there. I think one of the things that we see is sometimes, us as policymakers, and, when you look on the people on the ground, you find that there is a bit of a disjoint, to how we normally do things, and there is a level of a lack of public participation on some of these processes, and it's important that, as policymakers, we start to go to the communities so that they understand and, how we actually get to a particular decisions. And I think from our G20 presidency, I've seen, how some of the private sector players have been coming to observe, the work that we do, and to see how we normally actually get into, a particular declaration, and how hard it is to actually get into a particular declaration. So it's one of the things that I think we need to start doing. But also in terms of, what my colleague from Canada, mentioned, in terms of, the continuity, that, there are some areas of impact that you would like to see as a particular presidency, either from a G20 or G7. And sometimes it becomes a little bit difficult, to continue with the continuity sometimes, but sometimes you'll find that you can actually, push through some of the areas. But I think in terms of the continuity, I think one of the areas that we can actually look into is to look on the broader aspects, and if we were to look both in the G7 and G20, if we see, the areas that we can build a multi-year initiatives, that each and every presidency will continue, while you might have, some other different initiatives that you would like to achieve. I think that would work, and you'll find that, most of the work that we'll do will continue, on the other presidencies as well. But also, I think, because also you'll find that this work that we're doing, it goes to the other, global platforms as well, that are doing the implementation capacity. So I think if you feed these statements towards, the implementing, platforms, then I'm sure that, these initiatives can actually be advanced, at international level, as well as the multilateral stakeholders as well. I'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindy. Eugenia, perhaps we can get a quick response from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think for improving relations between G7 and G20, we need to explore areas of convergence, first of all. because particularly this year, the political environment at international level became more complex, let's say, with growing polarization or geopolitical tensions, ideological divides. And you see that President Lula was invited to attend the G7 in Canada, and he brought this message because it's easier said than done, of course. Let's cooperate, but since we are hosting COP30, climate change is one of the issues that he brought to the table in terms of concerns with sustainability globally, but also energy security. And all these challenges need international cooperation. So I think if we are able to see how the G7 and G20 can coordinate better, exploring the converging areas of where we can have concrete initiatives or perhaps discuss and being at least on the same page in some of these issues that are really essential for all of us. I think that's the way we should try always to move in that direction.
Great, thank you so much. Sumela, do we have any online questions?
Yes, there is one from Jamieson Poison. So it reads, Shabnam, we heard the need for decentralized DPI, and from Ellison, we have heard the need for multi-stakeholder engagement. And we often find open source software can help power both. Would love to hear your reflections on the role of open source or digital public goods for cooperation and DPI.
Okay, that's such a big question and so many things. I'm going to ask Shabanaz to respond to that, and then I'll just give everybody, if there is time, if we can keep it, then I'll ask everybody just if they want a quick comment on that too and close off. Thank you, Shabanaz.
Thank you. It is a very big question, but I think increasingly, one of the ways, DPI is obviously becoming increasingly important across the G20, but also, across other forums that we're part of. For example, the Freedom Online Coalition, we're also discussing quite a bit about DPIs. And so increasingly, the promise of DPI is moving infrastructure from the private space to the public spaces and really reimagining governments as sort of not just regulator, but also sort of shapers of market. And I think there's a real opportunity there. But in terms of just open source, DPI models, perhaps, the biggest promise is the fact that it's not a proprietary model necessarily, and that there's a lot of opportunity in terms of open source in different elements. So for example, whether it's going to be the underlying code, whether it is the switch, whether it is some parts of the data. But I think the real promise of DPI is to be able to lean on really a long legacy of open code principles, open source sort of principles in terms of ensuring that DPI is able to fulfill its promises in terms of being a truly public interest technology and truly be able to tackle some of the market consolidation issues that we see.
Thank you so much for that. I'm going to give the panelists, starting with Eugenio, if you want to just have one last comment, please go ahead.
Yes.
If we can keep it to 30 seconds.
Final remarks. I think, as I said, we were happy to have India, Brazil, and South Africa in terms of cooperation, South-South cooperation, also securing this smooth transition that I mentioned was essential. That I hope we can learn from this experience as a group and also help others for the next presidencies of the G20 and see how we can also be creative, but also fostering cooperation that we need we need right now to address some of these global challenges.
Yep. Alison, please go ahead.
Absolutely. Maybe two quick points. One is to just echo what I think Eugenio was talking about during one of his previous responses, discussing the sort of need for G7 and G20 both together and in their distinct forums to really focus on areas of convergence. I think it really speaks to the need to recognize that these groups have a fundamental role in really reflecting our underlying humanity, the places where we all come together, things like climate change, things like digital infrastructure, where we might be affected as countries in different ways, but where we all have equities and we all have to really work collaboratively in order to solve those intractable challenges. And as a very last point, of course, we had a slightly strange G7 year this year with an election in Canada in the first half, so there's more to come on our G7 presidency. We've got ministerials through the fall and some additional interesting digital work that I'm sure will be coming up in the coming months.
Yes, it's been an interesting 6 months all round, I think, globally. Lindy.
I think, Alison, I think on my side, I just want to emphasize, the need, to advance, the digital governance as well as AI, and to understand that these are not just technical issues and challenges. They are fundamental about the inclusion, equity, as well as shared responsibility, and also the choices that we make today will shape, our future for generations. But also from the G7 and G20, I think it's important that we build an open right space as well as people-centered digital world, that leaves no one behind. And I think these processes can, work together, to challenge some of the deeper challenges of the world. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sabina.
Thank you. I think I just want to build on one of the points that Alison mentioned in terms of the multi-stakeholder processes. I think, we as not-for-profits, civil society, think tanks are able to work across different processes. And we have been part of the G20 process from the India presidency. We've been part of the ASEAN negotiations, some of the early BRICS conversations, and now some of the G7 conversations. So I think leaning on your multi-stakeholder allies, leaning on your non-state stakeholders allies are really a really powerful way of building that convergence across different kinds of political processes and finding ways in which, because we live in this complicated geopolitical moment, to really find those commonalities across humanity.
Great. Thank you so much. I think I'm not even going to try and sum up the very interesting conversation we've had here, but I think there have been some very strong common themes around how we can leverage these multilateral processes through multi-stakeholder participation to deal with this moment in time, this poly-crisis that we are facing, use these different processes and between these different processes, so the things that are happening between these processes as well, to reinforce them and make sure that the incredible gains that have been made, I think, over the periods that they've existed, and particularly over the last period since COVID and during COVID, and since COVID, to deal with some of the crises that we face at the moment. So let's take that forward. A lot of work for both the G20 and the G7 until the end of the year. Thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much to Smela for online moderation. And thank you very much to the audience.
Thanks so much for coming to our panel. I know we're competing with so many other ones, but it's great to see a lot of people here. This panel will focus on exploring the evolving landscapes of multi-stakeholder governance in the digital age, with a focus on the outcomes of the WSIS 2020 and ensuring that all communities, including marginalized communities, persons with disabilities, and young adults and children are active participants in shaping the future of the IGF. So there's several different dynamic coalitions here, and we also have a booth in the main area where you could pick up information about the booth and about all of our DCs that are there. So we have, right here, we have the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, which focuses on the future of multi-stakeholder governance and making sure that it's inclusive not only in principle but in practice. We also have the Dynamic Coalition on core internet values, as well as the Dynamic Coalition on intergenerational planets, the Dynamic Coalition on security and stability, the Dynamic Coalitions on schools and internet governance, as well as the Dynamic Coalition on rights of children. So we have all of these coalitions here, and we're going to start first with the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability. And this is Dr. Mohammed Shabir. He, along with myself, are the co-coordinators of our Dynamic Coalition. So let me, without bring it over to Dr. Shabir.
Thank you very much, Judith. Thank you for giving the opportunity, and my colleagues for being at this table to discuss the future of multi-stakeholder governance. From the perspective of Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, I would have a couple of points to make in the initial intervention, and then we can follow those points in the interactive discussion. The first thing is that there are a number of instruments at the high level as well as regional and national level that talk about inclusivity, accessibility, and rights of persons with disabilities in the digital spaces. These range from, at the top of all these instruments sits the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which most of the governments by now have not just signed but ratified. Then we have WSIS 20+, which is being reviewed this year. That could be, that also talks about inclusivity. We have the Global Digital Compact, where inclusivity for persons with disabilities is also referred. And then we have Digital Inclusion Strategy by the UN Secretary General, where inclusivity is talked about. While this year is very important, as we all know, will be not only deciding the future of internet governance, but we will also be deciding that how the future of multi-stakeholder governance should be shaping up. So inclusion of persons with disabilities in the decision-making, as we discussed in the session on Beyond Tokenism, the inclusion of persons with disabilities in internet governance. This was one of the sessions where we talked about different ways and strategies that can be implemented in the way of involving persons with disabilities in further sessions. We, as Dynamic Coalitions, we also organized 3 key sessions in different clusters. I won't go into the details, but yesterday in Hall 5, we discussed about capacities and how principle-based models can be made inclusive, and it ensured that persons with disabilities are included in the decision-making of the future. the question here arises, why do we include persons with disabilities? Whereas we have so many people who could be deciding the future of digital governance, and they have been deciding it arguably, and it has been functioning. As a coordinator of the Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability, I would say it might be functioning. The system might be functioning for some, but there is a very huge number of population. That WHO would state that it is about 15 or 16% of the world population. Which, considering the total world population levels at 8 or 9 billion, would be equal to the total population of the country, which is India or China. So a huge number of population is there who are not benefiting or meaningfully benefiting from the processes or the systems that our so-called perfect technologists, policymakers have evolved. Therefore, when Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability comes on the stage and says that if you have not been able to evolve the perfect systems, perhaps this was because you had not the right people at the decision-making tables when you were making the decisions about the future of the internet. So it's high time that while we evolve the future systems now, we include persons with disabilities into those decision-making. So I stop here and we can discuss this further. Judith, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this. I'm going to next turn to my candidate on my left, Rajendra, with the DC economy.
Thank you, Judith. And this is a very important topic from the governance standpoint. You know that the global economy is digital, but still 1/3 of the people are still not connected to the internet. Which brings me to the very important point that the world GDP was 110 trillion last year. It could be 150 trillion. Just think how much difference it would make to the economy. And which brings a big question to the multi-stakeholder governance model we have. The empty seat here is symbolic. There are gaps. And these gaps are that our multi-stakeholder governance model is reactive, not proactive. And still knowing well that people are not connected, we have not been able to. Every year we come and see that the 2.7 billion people not connected become 2.6 billion. At this pace, it'll take more than a decade for us to connect the people. I think when we as the IGF put the tagline of internet we also want everyone to be connected to internet. I think there should be a study that think tanks should do, is the internet usage per capita and the GDP per capita. I would think that would be a good correlation. And we have to somehow look at not the multi-stakeholder governance per se, but the governance of multi-stakeholder governance. How do we govern it? What kind of issues we prioritize? I think overly we are prioritizing AI over access of internet, and not having internet itself is a disability, I would say. So I think the multi-stakeholder governance models need to reset a button to look at various dimensions and KPIs of what the governance should look like, what we should deliver before the end of the decade when the SDGs come to an end by 2030. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Rajendra, for this. Next, as time is very moving quickly, we're going to move to my right, and we're going to hear from Tatvik Grigorian from UNESCO.
Thanks very much. I'm here from UNESCO. I represent the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Universality Indicators. And as we talk about multi-stakeholderism, these indicators are rooted in multi-stakeholder approach. These are basically indicators that help countries assess their internet performance against the pillars of human rights, openness and accessibility, and multi-stakeholder governance, and cross-cutting issues such as gender equality, safety and security online, AI, and the environment. So I mentioned the M, multi-stakeholder governance, which is one of the key pillars of these indicators, hence also very much in line with the work that the Dynamic Coalition does. For us, multi-stakeholder participation and engagement and governance of the digital environment is not just a principle, but also at UNESCO, it is at the heart of our actions too, our activities. For example, if I speak within the scope of the Dynamic Coalition on this Internet Universality indicator, indicators, first step that we do after there's an agreement to do these assessments, we establish a multi-stakeholder advisory board that steers the entire process, that is providing input to these national voluntary assessment reports, and then validates the outcomes of the assessments and also the recommendations that we put forward to support the countries improve their digital environment. And then we encourage this maintenance of the multi-stakeholder advisory board also in carrying forward and implementing these policy recommendations. So we very much not only encourage it in principle, but we also facilitate this in action and convene these multi-stakeholder dialogues in this scope and ensure that every stakeholder group has a say around the table on these matters. This is just one example of, and as we speak within this scope of dynamic coalitions, of our work where we promote and foster multi-stakeholder engagement to the internet governance, but it is very much rooted in all of our activities. I'll stop here. If any questions, happy to take them. Thank you.
Thanks so much. We'll do questions and answers later, but want to make sure we have enough time for the panelists to make their quick statements. So I'll next go to Olivia Crepin-Laban for the DC on core internet values.
Yeah, thank you very much, Judith. Olivier Crepin-Laban speaking, and I'm here to speak to you about the core internet values and the work of the Dynamic Coalition. So what are the core internet values? They comprise the technical characteristics, technical architectural values by which the internet is built and evolves, and derives what can be called the social, or in other words, the universal values, which we've heard about just a moment ago, that emerge from the way that the internet works. The internet is a global medium open to all, regardless of geography or nationality. It's interoperable because it's a network of networks. It doesn't rely on a single application. It relies on open protocols like TCP/IP, like BGP. It's free of any centralized control, except for the needed coordination for the domain name system, the addressing, if you want, of the internet and the IP addresses. It's end-to-end, so the traffic goes from one end of the network to the other end of the network unhindered. It's user-centric, so users are able to basically choose what type of traffic they want to send through, what type of information they want to send through. They have full control over what they send and receive. And of course, it's robust and it's reliable. But of course, that was a while ago when the internet was created. A number of these values are being eroded. Things are changing on the internet. And so we're tracking the change that we're seeing happening on the internet. Earlier this week, on Wednesday, we had a workshop that also looked at artificial intelligence, AI, and tried to see if we could apply core internet values and derive from that some AI values. Very interesting discussion. It was very well attended. But one thing that did come out of the discussion was that the dynamic coalitions around this table, and in fact the ones that were in the other workshops, are all working sometimes on specific points that go on top of the core internet values. You've got the internet as the base, and other work grafts on the top of that. And so one of the things that my colleagues are not aware of now, one of the action items, is that we will be working with all of the different dynamic coalitions one-on-one and offering a partnership to try and see what core internet values relate to their work and how we can help defend their work through the core internet values. I hope it's a bit helpful, but I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Olivier, and thanks for sticking to your time. 'Cause time is always not our friend here. Next, I will go to Avri Doria, who's going to speak for the Schools of Internet Governance.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith, and thank you for chairing this session. My name is Avri Doria, and I coordinate the Dynamic Coalition on Schools and Internet Governance. We do a couple things. First of all, there are many schools that have sprung up around the world over, I guess, the last decade. Each one of them is a bottom-up affair. So what the Dynamic Coalition tries to do at the very top level is sort of offer materials, offer ways to look at things. We have developed a curriculum in the past that currently needs to be updated with all the new things that he's been talking about. We're currently working on a document, for example, on how to sustain a school. And it's once you found one and you get some money and you have all the enthusiasm of having created one, comes year 3 and year 4, and how do you keep the thing running? So we're doing that, and it's a very interesting exercise because that's done differently in different places in the world. Depends on how you've gone. So that's one of the things that the Dynamic Coalition does. The schools themselves basically do several things. One, they do coursework, and they look at the various topics, you know, whether it's AI, whether it's how IP works, whether it's what the political dimensions of schools are, etc. So that's one of the aspects of schools. The other aspects of schools that we help work on is what we call practica. And we have practicums where you look around the multi-stakeholder world and you find there are some of us that are constantly talking, constantly participating. The, what do we call but anyhow, the regular victims or the regular, but most people sit there quietly, and it comes from, at least it seems to come from, they never had a place to practice. They never had a place to sort of figure out how to behave, how to interject themselves. To some of us, it comes natural. To many, it doesn't. So a lot of these practica are there. The third thing that we focus on is actually what one could call it the theory of multi-stakeholderism or the theory of multi-stakeholder models. A couple years ago, and it may even be true for many now, people thought there was one multi-stakeholder model. It was the IGF model. Or maybe there was one multi-stakeholder model, and it was the ICANN model, or maybe there was one. And then basically, so we started looking at how you come down to the next level of what does it involve to have a multi-stakeholder model? Are there levels of maturity in a multi-stakeholder model? How do you progress in developing a multi-stakeholder model? So that, in a very quick, hand-wavy manner, is sort of what the schools on internet governance are about, and always happy to talk about it infinitely.
Thanks so much, Avri, and thanks for sticking to your time. Next, we'll go to Roberto Gaetano. He's with the DC of Interplanetary Networks, and they are doing internet in the space.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Yes, the DC on Interplanetary Networks, as the name suggests, is dealing with communication, interplanetary communication. Why is this different from the regular internet on Earth? That is because for the distances in space that create delays in the communication, and also the fact that we have widely moving nodes that can create interruptions in the communication. So basically, long story short, we have to use a different protocol that is delay and fault tolerance. So there will be some differences versus the regular internet. Another question is now that the way that interplanetary communication develops with the launch of space missions, for instance, with the possibility of communication to outer space and so on. Basically, what we have right now is a situation in which telecommunication operators or organization and organizations that are involved with launch of space vessels, NASA, for instance, just to name one. Those are the ones who are currently shaping up this scenario. So the problem is, having also learned the lesson from the regular internet, where we had a bit in a hurry and under pressure had to develop a governance model in order to ensure that all interested stakeholders have a place in the table and and can discuss how to govern the internet. In the same way, we believe that we need to develop and deploy an interplanetary internet governance model. And for instance, in these days we are discussing and we are thinking of using, and that gives me the possibility to advertise this booklet, which is the translation in several languages of the Sao Paulo Declaration of Net Mundial Plus 10. We are going to be using this to develop with the community a governance model that is really multi-stakeholder, that will ensure that also stakeholders that are not completely aware of the development of the interplanetary networks, like, for instance, civil society or users that will be impacted, can get into the process early, so that their interests and needs are represented. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roberto. The last panelist we have here is Walt Dinatris, and he is no, you're not on it? Okay. So then we'll go to our panelists of the DC Child Online Protection.
Thank you, Judith, for giving me the floor, although I was not supposed to be a panelist, but I had prepared to give some input to this session, so we're welcome. When it comes to multi-stakeholder collaboration, of course, from the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the digital environment, I need to refer to young people, and I really appreciate that we had many people around here at the IGF, many young people. We have the Dynamic Teen Coalition that was engaged in our work, and we also have the Dynamic Coalition, the Youth Coalition, let me say it in that way. I take the opportunity to refer to the General Comment number 25 on children's rights in the digital environment, because it has a whole chapter on the respect for the views of the child. And let me just quote. We did a child participation worldwide in preparation of the General Comment number 25. And there, the over 700 children in various languages reported that the digital environment afforded them crucial opportunities for their voices to be heard in matters that affect them. And I do think that we cannot deny, with 1/3 of all internet users worldwide are under the age of 18, though it means that they are a child in the sense of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, that we have not only give them a voice, but hear their voices and respect their views in regard of internet governance. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much. And Yuta is also, along with Marcus, the co-chairs of the Dynamic Coalition Coordinating Group of all different 30 DCs. So now we'll move to the next step. Well, okay, Wout wants to, in the end, he decided he wanted to speak.
Great.
Is it on? Yes. My apologies. I was not aware that I was on the list because I had not submitted myself, but I can, of course, speak a little bit. My name is Wouter Natris, and I represent the Dynamic Coalition on Internet Standards, Security and Safety here at the IGF, and we just produced our report on post-quantum cryptography this morning, and it landed really successfully well, I think, with some of the people in the room, so that's good to notice. But let me reflect on the future of multi-stakeholderism that we're discussing. And what we've been doing as dynamic coalitions as a group in the past, maybe 3 years by now, but certainly 2.5, is try to organize ourselves and get ourselves better known so that people in the IGF environment understand better what we as dynamic coalitions are doing. And I think that from the way that people within the community look at us at this moment is different than it was 3 years ago, because I ran into people even on the MAG who were not even aware that dynamic coalitions existed, or let alone what they did. And I think that has changed. The fact that we are now reported on, for example, by the Diplo Foundation, that was not happening 2 years ago, last year, is progress. And we have 1.5 years probably before the next IGF. And how will dynamic coalitions present themselves in November or December 2026 when there is a new IGF anywhere in the world? We don't know yet. I think that that is where we can make the next step, and we have time to make the next step. So what I'm advocating is that what we've managed to do with the DC clustering, it also brings together overarching themes. We notice that we start working on this, we're sort of working on the same topic from a different angle. And that allows us to make better messages and perhaps common messages, like what you invited us to do. And thank you for that, Olivier. But also I think that we need to have a bigger voice in the future. And what I would suggest that we try to advocate is that we have a spot in the MAG to make sure that the integration of our work becomes better known within the process, so that the clustering we have now become part of the themes. And that is something that has nothing to do with the workshop program, but it has something to do with getting the messages across of our work that we do during the whole year across in a far better and integrated way. And that is something that we can discuss and organize and see if the other dynamic coalitions agree on. But it's something that I would advocate, to have a voice in the MAG so that we're all at the same level and not that we're always somewhere as an appendix on the side. And I think that would make multi-stakeholder and integrated governance far better, stronger, and more influential in the future. So let me stop there, and thank you for the opportunity, Judith.
Thank you so much, Wout. And I'll go over to Marcus for a comment.
Yes, thank you, Judith. And you called me co-chair with Utah of the coordination group. Actually, we call ourselves co-facilitators. Sounds less important than co-chairs. No, I had very much support Wout's comments. We really have come a long way, and I think by clustering and having also the main session, we have a bigger impact. Now, whether or not a seat on the MAG will make that much difference, I'm not necessarily convinced, but we have a MAG liaison and we need to use this better, but let's park that discussion. We can have it among ourselves. I was just going to make a minor point listening to Utah, and she pointed out that legally speaking, somebody under 18 is a child, which obviously doesn't make much sense. And I make myself here the spokesman of the Teens Dynamic Coalition, who actually put forward a quite thoughtful paper saying we need to look at the ages in a different way. The UN category is youth is 18 to 35, and to be frank, a 35-year-old is a very mature youth. And it doesn't make much sense, but we cannot change something that's enshrined in a General Assembly resolution. But we can apply it maybe with more flexibility. And the Dynamic Teen Coalition, they suggest below 12, these are children, and they fall in the category where we have to look after them. Whereas from 13 to 18, they are teenagers. Well, till 19, they are teenagers, but in most countries, when you're 18, you're adult. So you have different rights and responsibilities. And then they also go on, say, they are young adults, young professionals, they're people mid-career, and they are the oldies who maybe can take on a different role as mentoring. And I actually like this idea of looking at the age categories with a fresh eye. But we will not be able to change General Assembly resolutions, but I think the teens have made themselves heard, and Amrit was in various sessions, and he has my admiration. At his age, I would not have been able to argue so effectively and coherently. So these are my quick comments on this matter, but Jutta may have more comments because she's a professional dealing with children and children's rights. Thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you, Markus. I just wanted to get into that because isn't it also due to the opportunities that the digital environment opens up for children that they are now in this position? Because otherwise, like those teens that are under the age of 18, they could only have come to the internet accompanied by adults, that like we had in several years earlier on in the internet governance community. But now, with all these digital opportunities, they can take part via Zoom, for example. They can raise their voice. They can make them heard themselves. So kind of, the internet with the World Wide Web came up in 1989. That was the same year that the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child came up. So we have kind of parallel developments, and I'm pretty sure they are interrelated with each other. The digital technologies have opened up for children's evolving capacities, evolving in a certainly changed way than it was beforehand.
Thanks so much, Jutta. And this will also go out to our next segment, which is some policy questions.
Can I ask a question? If I can, I'd like to just add one thought to that. One, this is one reason why the DCs, when they started out, sort of declared a degree of independence from the MAG and the UN and its strictures, so that we wouldn't necessarily be as bound by all the UN, edicts, such as we could decide what we wanted in terms of how we were doing things and what. And two, as a street kid at 16, if anybody had told me I was a child, there would have been a battle.
But it's only words.
Yeah. No, this also leads us directly into our policy question of what policies are important in the process of enabling multi-stakeholder practices. You touched on the idea of the digital ideas that we can now get the youth to engage themselves, and they don't have to come with an adult or the other stuff. The Teen Coalition calls on the calls in the early morning and the early evening, and so they're very active. But, Rajendra, I know you wanted to make a comment on.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Markus said, that as what I have experienced over the decades, the DCs, this is the best model for looking at the multi-stakeholder governance. I think, as Avri said, independent, flexible. I have not come across any time when anyone made a suggestion, it was thwarted or debated. Anything good, immediately accepted and acted upon. So I would actually congratulate those who facilitate the dynamic coalitions within the IGF and the Secretariat for keeping that spirit alive of change and hope along with continuity. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Yeah, so who wants to Avi, do you want to talk about that question of policies that are important in the process of enabling multi-stakeholder?
Certainly. I'm always willing to talk about just about any topic. But the policy, certainly within the dynamic coalitions, it's very important that we be open and accept the whole notion that bottom up, these things are dealt. Thank you for being here, Marcus. You know,
Bottom up.
Bottom up. Thank you very much for reminding me where I was. But basically, that becomes a very important part because, as I was saying before, when the dynamic coalitions get constrained into a certain rules, a certain box, a certain structure, is when we find that we can't be all that dynamic. You know, having the basic rules that we have to be open, that we have to have a mailing list, that we have to be coalitions, which means we have to have people from the many stakeholder groups, is a very basic set of requirements. But beyond that, as multi-stakeholder models develop, as we get beyond thinking of there being a single model, a single way to do things, it really is in the dynamic coalitions that you sort of have the crucible where you can try things, you can fail, you can come, you can succeed, and such, that becomes more and more a problem as things start to have the blessing of the top down. Part of the problem with the IGF is its top down nature. Dynamic coalitions are the one place where we get to experiment with sort of the other half of what it means to be multi-stakeholder, bottom up multi-stakeholder models. Thanks.
Thanks so much. Do any other coalitions want to mention something? Otherwise, we'll go to the next question. Okay, so the next question is, how can multi-stakeholder models be further developed to make them more inclusive and accessible? And I'll point from my cue to Dr. Shabir to talk about that.
Thank you very much for that. And I've been listening to my fellow DC representatives talk about different aspects, and I've been thinking that how best we can evolve this multi-stakeholder model that we have going up and running. And I reflected upon the suggestion that came out from Wout and then the discussion by Avery on the having a voice or space on the MAG by the DCs. And I would, for one, from the perspective of DCAD, whereas I would want the multi-stakeholder model as it exists today to evolve that to include the voice of persons with disabilities on the MAG. Why so? Because this is the largest minority that is just being made into a checkbox under the diversity umbrella. It should not be that. On the other hand, as the coordinator of Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability and one of the oldest dynamic coalitions in existence, I would argue for the argument that Avery has put forward. And that is, we must guard the system that we have here within the dynamic coalitions, and that is bottom-up multi-stakeholder. We, as the coordinators of the dynamic coalitions, we are not the chairs who would give directions from the top to be implemented. We facilitate the work of the coalitions. As Marcus very rightly said, that they are, Marcus and Utah are preferred to be recognized as facilitators of the work, because our job is not to give directions. Our job is to give guidance, to provide resources, and to facilitate the work that community wants from us. And in that, I just was thinking that whether teens I hear Amrit, and I am really impressed by his prowess and his argumentation at this age. But when I think of the other side of the teens with disabilities, those who do not have the right opportunities, then I need to consider that multi-stakeholder model, so-called, needs to evolve, and it needs to be multi-stakeholder in true sense and not just be some checkboxes here and there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dr. Shabir. I'll go to Roberto Gaetano as he has some input.
Yes, Roberto Gaetano, DC Interplanetary. I have two comments on this. The first is once the former CEO of ICANN said a multi-stakeholder model has to be global and equal. And I think that this is a very, very important. We cannot just have a vague representation of the stakeholders, but the model has to be global in the sense that those stakeholders have to represent different geopolitical situations, and equal. The stakeholder groups have to participate on equal footing. I think that this is something that is very important. Is actually the band that has played in Music Night takes the name GEMS, which is exactly the acronym for Global, Equal, Multi-Stakeholder. I think that we have to, one thing that we have to do is to make sure that whenever we speak about the multi-stakeholder model, we are very attentive on the fact that it is global and equal. There's one other point that came, by the way, also in one of the sessions that I have attended. Within a stakeholder group, we have to make sure that there's not a subgroup that monopolizes the discussion, that monopolizes the presence. For instance, one of the most various, more diverse stakeholder group is probably civil society. But civil society comes in different shapes, in different forms. There are different types of stakeholder that belong to the bigger group of civil society, and we have to make sure that also within a stakeholder group the different types of stakeholder are represented. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Roberto. We have two more quick comments. One from Roberto, and I'm going to keep it short because we want to make sure we have time for questions from the audience. And then Wow.
Thank you. I have a question, not question, actually a reflection back on the governance and the role of DCs, what we do. So it should not be just the noise that some makes, and I'm not castigating or putting some people in the corner, but actually on the impact we create. I mean, if you look at the Wout's work on standards, if you look at our friends' work on the core internet values and others, these are substantive original works in contribution to the knowledge of domain of internet. I think that should be the primary focus. I'm not very, I would say in favor of seats or titles. I'm in favor of original substantive works that adds to the knowledge for this domain of internet, that creates an impact on ground. So I think we'll have to look at, like today, as 20 years of IGF, what is our stated position as DCs on the issue of environment? Because everything we do today in the digital economy has a carbon footprint, and we know global warming and what it's doing to us. Second, what's happening on the job side, like as digital economy, we created Project Create, is how do you use technology for jobs? Every time you open the news, you see that 30 million jobs will be lost today, what I read in the morning. So it's scary at times, and I think this will boomerang into a huge mental health issue for the world. So we'll have to look at DCs and how are we addressing these issues to create an impact. A seat on the MAG or not will not make much of a difference, but what we make as a difference to the digital economy is going to be measured in terms of what we have added to the domain. I think this is where it matters for us to be impactful.
Thanks
Thank you.
so much. Wow.
Yes, thank you, Judith. Whether we have the seat on the MAG or not is not the real topic, I think. I think that what we've shown in the past 2 years is that we've learned from each other what we're doing. That is one. That we'll probably be able to integrate more because of the clusters and that way become more impactful. When I think of the IGF, just going back to 2009 when I visited my first IGF, I went to as many sessions as I could, and I was so impressed with the brilliant people giving brilliant solutions to topics. But some of them still have not been solved. So we're 16 years down the line and still sometimes discussing the same sort of things. Maybe we call it AI now, but if you look one step up, it's the same issue. In other words, we have the people to make a difference, except somehow the integration of that message is not coming across in the places where it needs to land. And I think that that is the challenge of whether we get a 5-year or a 10-year or an eternal mandate for the IGF. It is about bringing people to the table that decide, I think I have to make a difference. And that will be the main challenge that the IGF faces, where it has to move from a talk shop to an influencing position. And if we can manage to do that, then we'll change the world. And that's why I advocate that our outcomes as dynamic coalitions should be heard better, and that starts with having more influence on the organization of the IGF, because that's where we bring our message across. And Avri, just to come back to one of your comments, I think yesterday, I was not really aware what you guys were doing, but you make an actual difference how you coordinate on topics and that sort of thing. So that should be heard. There's not that somebody comes to tell you, I want you to do this now, but that you send your message, we're making a difference in the internet governance world. And I think that that is the sort of message that we need to start to share actively. And we have made that start, and however we continue, but it's something we need to discuss in our group, like Marcus said, internally, and then set the steps we need to take. So that's how I want to advocate the IGF, the dynamic coalitions, and then I'll shut up because I said what I wanted to say.
Thanks so much, Wow. We want to go for a Q&A, and so there's a mic set up over there. If in person want to stand up for that, I'm just going to check with my colleague because we might have some interventions online. So,
thanks, Judith. Currently, we have 23 people taking part online and following us from everywhere around the globe. And there is a discussion going on. It was raised the attention by Carlos Afonso on a development on the multi-stakeholder structure of the internet governance in Brazil. There's a lively discussion going on. Links and further informations are provided. And there is a question raised by Emmanuel Oruk from Uganda, who would like to know more about the concept of a dynamic coalition. We are talking about what dynamic coalition are doing and what they're delivering and output and so on. But he wants to learn more about the concept and how to engage as an individual in a dynamic coalition.
Olivier?
Yeah.
And then Jutta.
Yeah, thank you, Judith. It's Olivier speaking. I'd be happy to answer that because just a couple of days ago I was asked a similar question. And the question I was asked is, what is a dynamic coalition? Why is it dynamic? Does it have a start, a beginning, an end? What do you people work on? Are these projects? Are these ongoing things? And the answer that I provided was potentially maybe one of many different answers, because we are so many different coalitions and so we deal with so many different topics. But the dynamism of a dynamic coalition is one that actually advances with times. It has it deals with issues that are related to the internet that is changing, And so the issues that we might have been working on or that we were focusing on a few years ago might be they might have evolved since. And in fact, for some, thanks to the work of that coalition, the issues have advanced. It's dynamic because it's moving, but it's also open. And I think maybe that's one of the things we've not actually emphasized enough. They are all open. You don't need to pay a subscription or to queue up or to be co-opted into it by some panel that will check whether you're worthy of being in that coalition or not. It's actually open to everyone, and all of them are open. They're all very friendly. They are run by people who have years of experience in trying to get more people involved. And this is one of the big difficulties we've had, I'll be very frank, is actually attracting more people to go and join. Because, yeah, there is intersessional work going on. There's a lot of work needed. We're not dealing with simple issues that can be fixed in a matter of seconds. But it's also exciting because it kind of puts this bridge between the different IGFs. It's not just something that happens once a year. It's something that happens all the time and that continues to grow. So that's what I wanted to say about it. Thank you.
We have a quick one from Utah, and then we have Shabir and you.
Yes, because we all have been approached over the last 4 days by people who wanted to join a dynamic coalition. It's really useful to have this booth in the IGF village where everybody can meet us. But still, when it comes to how do I get to become a member of a dynamic coalition, it's a bit tricky. You go to the website, you need to have a look on the intersessional part. Even understanding that it's intersessional work the dynamic coalitions are doing is a bit difficult. But to make it short, everybody can subscribe to the mailing lists of the dynamic coalitions to get informed about the work the dynamic coalition, the respective dynamic coalition is doing. Secondly, you can apply to become a member. It's just saying, my organization or me as an individual, I want to be a member of this dynamic coalition. Then you will be listed in the list of stakeholders within that dynamic coalition. And these are the first 2 steps, and then it's up to each of the individual dynamic coalitions to set up how they work together. Some meet on a regular basis, others meet only occasionally. Some produce joint reports, some gather information of what their members have been doing in regard of the objectives of the dynamic coalition. So that is different across the dynamic coalitions. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Dr. Spiel, I know you wanted to make a comment as well.
I think Jutta and Olivier have best described, so
okay.
I'll go.
And Avri.
Yeah, quick thing. I'm really glad you put it. And just to sort of marry it to something that Wout has been saying, perhaps we've also can take on an action for the coordination group that says, we have to make that more visible. We have to make that something easier for people to find and put it out. So perhaps we should give ourselves sort of, after this is all over and we've rested, indeed make ourselves more visible by making that easier for people to find and do it.
We had a meeting with the MAC chair the day before yesterday, agreeing exactly on that approach.
Yes. Okay, so now I know our colleague over there has been waiting patiently by the mic. So I will go to him. Please tell us your name, your organization.
Thank you. So my name is Kjetil Kjærsmo. I'm kind of unaffiliated. I represent only myself. I have 3 assumptions or perhaps even observations. And one of them is that the power of internet governance is not in this room. It is chiefly with big tech. The second thing is that I was sort of a part of the Global Digital Compact process, and I noticed there were no challenges to multi-stakeholderism in there, whereas digital commons were completely removed, even though there were many excellent contributions in a dedicated deep dive. And the third thing is that polycentrism, which is part of the digital commons narrative, has been used by humanity for thousands of years. And there is a rich theory and a rich practice. So aren't we, or aren't we trying to reinvent the wheel here? Shouldn't we be moving towards polycentrism rather than multi-stakeholderism? Thank you.
Yeah. So very right intervention, and I think if you heard my statement, the issue is not with multi-stakeholder governance. The issue is governance of multi-stakeholder governance. I think as we see the world today, it is small number of large companies that drive the internet rather than large number of small companies, and that's the difference we have to make. And I think it's not reinventing the wheel. We should first break the wheel and create something different. And that is what the flexibility we all have in this room to speak our mind and to work towards it. And luckily, no one stops us. I mean, our reports have always come out based on inputs given by people from 60, 70 countries. And we have released them here at IGF, stating that this is the way to go. What Wout told us, we should not start appreciating a problem over time. We should try to solve it. And I think that collectively we have to start. Question is when? The time is now. We are already late.
Thanks so much. And Avery?
Yeah, just one quick thing. I don't think anybody is ignoring any of the historical. I think there's a lot of admission that multi-stakeholder models have evolved from previous models, that there have been models throughout history that have given us the ideas that we're building on. So it's really not an ignoring history. It's sort of, there's a lot of parts of history that sort of had their moment and then got forgotten. And how do we take what was really valuable in those and sort of incorporate it in sort of the things that are being done now? And totally agree with you. We have to use what we've got here to indeed make more of an impression on those that do hold the power at the moment. So really don't disagree with anything except that we should use old words instead of new words.
Well, make it quick.
I will. In internet security, that a report that I've written about 5 years ago now, we identified that it's about the tragic of the commons. The internet is sort of from everybody, despite those 5, 6, 7, or 8 major companies, but it's everybody's. So when it's everybody's, nobody cares at some point whether it's secure or not, because somebody else will do it for me. And I think that is not reinventing the wheel, it's going back to the very fundamentals of how things once started thousands of years ago. And we've sort of forgot that lesson.
Thank you so much. Dr. Shabir, we're quick because I want to get you.
Yes, thank you very much, Judith. And since I have the notice from the moderator, so I'll be quick without... Power politics is my subject as a student of international relations, and we all know it is not equally distributed. And through the centuries, it has not been, and it would never be. Power that be would not voluntarily give the equal distribution of it to anyone. So while we may not have the power to change things at our will in this room, we do have the power in this room to influence things. And that's what we are doing. Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability is trying to make the internet and internet governance spaces equal for people with disabilities. And that's where the power of our dynamic coalitions, all our dynamic coalitions comes. We have the power of the people, which cannot be taken away from us. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Let me check with our online. Do we have any questions online? Okay, so we can go to the gentleman over there.
Okay, thanks. Give me the floor. I'm Henry Wang from Singapore Internet Governance Forum, so SG IGF, and also I'm the co-founder for Lingo AI. So yes, for the last 20 years, the power is not in the room. It's controlled, dominated by the large companies, definitely. But for the next 20 years, the power will be in this room. Okay, it's not because we are discussing, we're talking about that. It's because of the dynamic of the internet. The protocols are evolving. So the protocols for the people are coming. And not only coming, it's already invented and it's ready to be deployed for the power of people. So why the large company dominate for the last 20 years, even after IGF was established? Because the protocols lead to the centralization of our data and also lead to the centralization of our infrastructure. But now it's different. So for the next 20 years, the infrastructure will be decentralized by the deepening network. It can be built by the community with space-ground integration network, with mesh network to be built by people, not necessarily by centralized carriers. That's on the infrastructure level. On the application level, the data currently centralized in large companies will be decentralized, and by protocols like Solid, like MetaLife, it will be controlled by every users. So so the day is coming. So a dynamic, coalition will play the important role together with NRIs.
Thank you so much, Henry. We have to have one more quick question, and then we'll go to the panelists.
It's maybe like in my comments.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
You just need not to. It's
No press. It's okay. Yep. Thank you very much for all panelists. My name is Vasily Zudin. I represent the Center for Global IT Cooperation, a Russian NGO which actively works within ITU and IGF formats. And I would like to say many thanks for this, for these really interesting panels. And the main idea that dynamic coalition is very important and appreciated in the world. In Russia, we have IGF Forum, Youth Forum, and this June they hosted the first global digital forum, which bringing together representatives from technical communities, experts society, and government from more than 100 countries, including high level of UN and ITU representatives. In this case, we invite the dynamic coalition to collaborate with us, and the main thought and the main idea, let's work together. Thank you very much for useful dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have if you can make your answers short, because I want to go to the wrap to give you a time, or maybe best try to answer the question along with your 30 seconds of wrap up. And so I will go to Jutta for the
society organization. We are improving on not only making the society organization, we are improving on not only making the children's rights heard, and their voices heard, but also their rights to be respected. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Shabir, 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you. Very difficult. So I would just go directly to the concluding statement that I have. So Dynamic Coalition on Accessibility and Disability stands ready to work with our fellow dynamic coalitions, and there are a number of subjects that one can work with. If we want the people to use the internet meaningfully, we need to not just think only about those 2.7 billion who are not connected, but 1.5 billion people who may be connected, may be in a well-developed country, may have state-of-the-art devices with the high-speed internet, but still be unable to use the internet. And I invite you to think about that situation and put yourselves in that. What would you do if you were in that situation? I rest my case. Thank you.
Dr. Vic?
Thanks very much. I just wanted to reiterate that for UNESCO, the Internet universality concept that is grounded in Rome principles, A being accessibility and M being multi-stakeholder participation and governance, is UNESCO's official position endorsed by 194 member states, which we do advocate for and we do reinforce on the ground too. And it is very much grounded in other processes and activities that UNESCO carries on, and this has been our position, and we continue working, so engaging the diverse stakeholders on the ground. And yes, for us, this is the reality, this is the present, and we will continue doing so. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Within the dynamic coalition on schools, and in terms of making a difference from the school's perspective, we have seen our students from the various schools going into industry, going into all the institutions and the association, and there really is a concept of making the change, making the difference, one classroom at a time, one student at a time. I meet them all the time, and they are pushing the values we try to convince them of.
Thanks so much, Avery. Roberto?
Yes. First of all, what is the value for us as Dynamic Coalition on Interplanetary Network to work with the other Dynamic Coalitions is that in order to build our model of governance, we can use the experience of all the other groups, and that is very good. On the other hand, what we can bring to the dynamic coalitions is to add another dimension. That means the ability of further developing the governance model to apply that to situations that are not part of the ordinary internet.
Thanks so much. Wow.
Yes, thank you. On behalf of the Dynamic Coalition Internet Standards, Security and Safety, I would say that it's a disgrace that many companies have still not deployed internet standards that are sometimes there for 20 years that would secure us immediately. So every government and big company around the world has to start procuring their ICT secure by design, because that's an economic incentive that won't be ignored. On Dynamic Coalitions, let's rock the world in 2026 and make sure that we're better heard. So thank you for this session, because we really said what needed to be said.
Thanks so much for everyone coming to the session, and please come to our booth, and that's where you could learn more about us. So again, thanks for coming.